Hi everyone, and welcome to Financial Basics. Today we're going to get straight into it and talk about FIRE and the different types of FIRE. So I want to start with what is a traditional retirement and just talk about the idea of retiring at the age of 65. And then I want to look at FIRE specifically. FIRE is financial independence, retire early. And then I want to do a little bit of a dive into what are the components of FIRE. There are different types of FIRE. When can I retire? Just dealing with that calculation and the maths behind that. And then we can just do a quick segment into some of the things that you can do to start your FIRE journey, and then some of the problems with FIRE or some of the criticisms to FIRE. And then we can just summarize. So traditional retirement is basically retiring at a normal retirement age, which is 65 or 67, depending on where you are in the world. Everyone has to do two things in their life. They have to retire or they have to die. And the plan is usually by some age you want to stop working. Why is this traditionally 65? Because if you give yourself to 65 to retire, then that's how long it's going to take you to save enough to actually enter retirement and stop working. And there's actually a law for this. It's called Parkinson's law. Work expands until all of the available time is consumed, right? And you really need to ask yourself, if you want to move from a traditional retirement to a FIRE mindset, the very first thing you have to ask yourself is, how much is enough? How much do I actually need to retire securely and safely? So do the math and then figure out what the actual path is, because it's an inferior goal, right? It's not like a clear, solid goal until you've fully understood what that number is and you can actually start working towards it. And actually, even before you get to the point where you want to work towards it, you want to know how far along on that path are you actually? Because a lot of people just panic and go, oh, I'm nowhere near that. But they don't actually understand where that process starts. They don't understand at what point they are on that journey. And if you haven't grasped that, then you can never get to this point where you're like, well, I'm actually potentially 10 years from retirement, or I'm actually already past the point. And I feel like a lot of financial advisors and a lot of people online, on YouTube or whatever the case, that talk about retirement or talk about your net worth or what your net worth needs to be, a lot of them are very focused on just maximizing your net worth, which is not the goal for FIRE. Your goal for FIRE is, I think 90% of the work is actually figuring out what you need. So what is FIRE? It's financial independence, retire early. It's a lifestyle, it's an investment strategy with the goal of gaining financial independence and retiring early through your investments, through your savings, through what's generated in passive income. And the goal is to get there as in the shortest possible time, in the quickest time possible. And you do this through fundamentally maximizing your savings rate. And inversely, because this is two sides of the same calculation, when you maximize your savings rate, you're actually minimizing your expenses. And it is enormously powerful when you minimize your expenses in terms of what you can live off of and what you need in order to survive. It becomes so much easier to get to a realistic FIRE goal. So spend less than you earn, invest in everything that you have that's a surplus, and do everything in your power to avoid debt. And this is a long-term mindset, a long-term journey. This could take decades for some people. Depending on your income, depending on your lifestyle, depending on the choices that you make, even a FIRE journey could be 20 years. You want to get that down as low as possible, but 20 years is better than 40 years. So in my opinion, the key components for FIRE is you cannot save 10 to 15%. If you save 10 to 15%, you're going to do it when you're 65. You absolutely need an emergency fund. And the emergency fund is your buffer between you and digging into your investments. Getting to a point where you actually need to sell some of your investments in some way, shape or form in order to deal with a crisis. And that's super critical. You cannot really take advantage of the exponential growth that's going to happen with your investments over this long period of time if you are always digging into it to deal with a crisis. And the biggest one for me is losing your job, but obviously there are other things that can happen. Your car breaks down, you know, there could be some damage to your house, flooding, whatever the case may be. And yes, there are many situations where insurance is going to step in and cover a lot of that, but there's also a lot of situations where you're going to be taking a big hit in dealing with these emergencies. And the thing here, at least in my opinion, is a lot of the time, some of these crises do actually stack on top of each other. So you want to make sure that you have a decent emergency fund to protect from that, where you might lose your job, and at the same time, the reason why you've lost your job is because the economy is down. And if the economy is down, probably your investments are low. So now you're selling your investments in order to deal with the crisis at the worst possible time. And then what I've emphasized already with regards to FIRE, make sure you have a clear financial goal. Understand exactly and precisely how much you need. You don't need more than that. You've worked it out. You're comfortable with the risks associated with that. And once you're at that point, go for it. So what's calculated is the 4% rule. And everybody talks about this. And we will dive a little bit deeper into what that number actually represents and how it was calculated. But inversely, what that means is you need 300 times your monthly expenses, or 25 years worth of expenses invested, because that's going to generate sufficient growth to deal with the ups and downs of the market, and that safe withdrawal rate at 4%. 12 months, 25 years, 300 times your monthly expenses. And you can see there what happens if your savings rate changes, whether it's 10%, 25%, 50%, or even 75%. How long is it going to take you to save 1 year of your salary, of your income, right, of your expenses? So at 10%, it's going to take you 9 years to save 1 year's worth. And then you would have to do that for 25 cycles. So you would, in theory, assuming no growth, assuming that investment just sat there in a bank account, it would take you 225 years to get to 25 years worth of growth. And you can see how that becomes shorter and shorter the more you invest. But obviously, these are just timelines based on a linear going forward. Obviously, that money is also going to grow. And because of that growth, that timeline actually becomes shorter. And what I want to say here is, when people turn 65, if they haven't done these calculations, if they don't know these answers, then they get to 65 and they simply retire. Oh, okay, I guess this is the amount that I get in retirement. I'm just going to have to adjust my lifestyle, whatever that requires, in order to live within my means once I've retired. So if your current expenses are $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, whatever it is, and you haven't been investing properly, and potentially you only have $1,000 a month in retirement, you've now hit that break point the moment you retire. And you're probably going to have to get another job. You're probably going to have to work through retirement to some extent to cover those gaps, or you're going to have to reduce your lifestyle. So you haven't done that calculation, and now you're retiring at 65. So why 4%? So they did calculations, and so what this graph represents fundamentally, those calculations basically look at just that compounding risk from when you retire, and they look at what is the probability that you will still have money in your portfolio after a 20-year period, depending on how much you withdraw every month or every year. So you can see here, if you have a balanced portfolio of bonds and stocks, and you're withdrawing at 3 or 4% a year, you can clearly see, even if you retired the day before the Great Depression, or the 2008 financial crisis, whatever the case may be, when any moment in that period, you will be fine. You would still have money after 20 years, right? So you can look at that, you can go, okay, there's 100% or 95, 98% chance that you will still have money left over when you, after 20 years, if you were to withdraw at between 3 and 4%. And you can see how that drops off dramatically after that. So if you start with withdrawing 6% of your retirement funds every year, or your pot, then there may be an 80% chance that you're going to have funds available after that 20-year period. So 20% of the portfolios fail during looking at that entire period between 1871 and 2023. So this is that same graph, but shown over a 30-year period. So what is the probability that you will still have funds available after 30 years in retirement? So if you retired at 65, what is the chances that by the age of 95, you would still have some money in your portfolio? And you can see again, even at the 4%, there is still a very high chance, if you have a balanced portfolio of stocks and bonds, that you will still be, you will still have funds available. And we can look at that graph as well for 50 years. So yeah, as long as you're not 25% in stocks or 100% in bonds, and obviously this is a balance. If it's 25% in stocks, then 75% bonds, 50% stocks, 50% bonds, this is the split. As long as you're not in those those bottom two categories, you can see there is almost, right, somewhere between 100 and a 90% chance that you're actually going to be okay, even withdrawing 4% after 50 years in retirement. So if you were to retire at 65, you're going well into the hundreds here. And you would actually be okay. You would still have money available in your portfolio, even if you retired the day before the Great Depression. So the worst possible time in the market to retire, you would still have funds available. You wouldn't have run out of money. So let's just talk a little bit about the different types of FIRE and what they mean. And the way I see FIRE, it's not single entities. These are actually on the same spectrum. So, and what I mean by that is I see it as like steps to independence, as opposed to you can only do Coast FIRE or you can only do all of these different variants, right? So the way I see it is the amount of money in your portfolio determines which stage you're at. And the final stage is actually traditional retirement. So even traditional retirement, it's on this same continuum. If you're in line, if your projection is I will be able to hit my financial goals at the age of 65, then it's a traditional retirement. And if it was 64 years and 11 months, then all of a sudden you're technically in a FIRE state, right? You're in some form of FIRE where your intention is to retire before the 65 traditional year age. So Coast FI, I would describe as the first step towards your FIRE journey. It is by far the easiest FIRE step to get and to hit. And all that means is you are building a portfolio early and you're growing it passively from a certain point onwards. This does not change the age at which you retire. So you hit that Coast FI point when you have enough in your investment pool. If you do the calculations that by the time you reach 65, assuming that the investments will continue to grow and they're invested in a portfolio of stocks or shares or ETFs, then by the time you hit 65, you will have enough to retire. And what that means is, I don't have to contribute anymore into my retirement, but it also means a lifestyle change for me, because now I have potentially an extra 20, 30, 15, whatever the number is, % of my income available to spend now, so I can live a better lifestyle because I don't have to worry about that retirement number anymore. And so it's just balancing that out and going, okay, at what point do I hit that goal? At what point do I pass that point where I'm Coast FI? And I've actually done a couple of other videos on this. For example, if you are looking at gifting your child something, I have a whole video on for $5,000 or pounds. If you invested it when they were born, by the age of 65, they would have $1 million or pounds, whatever currency you're working in, just on an 8.5% growth rate, which is reasonably conservative. So I believe that, so for £5,000, what that means is you are already technically making that child Coast FI from the moment they're born. They're already past that first step. Now they're retiring at 65, and then the question becomes twofold. Is that enough? Do they want to save more than that to potentially have a larger retirement value? And secondly, it frees up that money potentially for lifestyle things, for other things that they might want to do. And I think the target audience, at least for this type of FIRE, for Coast FI, for that first step, is people that want a little bit more flexibility in their careers. I want to go maybe step back a bit from the job that I'm doing. It might be a little bit stressful, maybe too intense. Traveling nurses, anything that, or even truck drivers, whatever the case may be, oil rig workers, anything like that, where you're working really hard and it's really tough on your body, like physical stuff, or even stuff that's just emotionally intense. You just want to be able to step back from that at a certain point, and you could continue to live with your current expenses and just go, okay, I'm gonna do 50% of the work, or I'm gonna work for 3 days a week, or whatever the case may be. And obviously the key number here is just tracking that value and working out at what point you're actually passing this Coast FI. It's also a great feeling and a great point to celebrate that, once you're at that point, you could go, maybe we should be figuring out how to spend a bit more as well, how to, maybe do more holidays, maybe back away a little bit from the intensity of chasing FIRE. And you can obviously weigh that up in an easy calculation to go, okay, if I take an extra holiday this year or an extra 2 holidays, what does that translate to in bringing that date forward, right? So how much does it slow me down if I'm continuing to invest and continue to progress on that continuum of FIRE? So the tips here to achieve FIRE is really focus on heavy investing and early investing. And then spend some time and actually plan it out, what you can do. How do you lower your stress? And also, how do you make your life more convenient? It's a question that I think everybody struggles with. It's if somebody asks you, okay, you have $1 million and you've got to spend it on things that just reduce the stress in your life. So how do you actually go about that? And you can't invest that million, right? You can't bring that date forward. What do you do with the $1 million? Well, it's obviously something that you need to wrestle with and actually try and figure out. Barista FIRE, it's a little bit further on from Coast FI. You've passed Coast FI now. You're moving on to Barista FIRE. Barista FIRE is partial financial independence. You're on your way there to full financial independence, but you're not quite there yet. Your portfolio is sufficiently large that you feel comfortable now withdrawing on your portfolio. So in Coast FI, you're not going to touch your portfolio. So you're not adding to it and you're not pulling from it. But Barista FIRE, you can now start pulling from your portfolio. And what that means is your portfolio is paying for a portion of your monthly expenses or your annual expenses, not in its entirety, but a portion. So let's say, for example, 50 to 70% of your monthly expenses were covered by withdrawing from your portfolio on a monthly or annual basis. And it just frees up that time. So you might still need to work, but as the name suggests, Barista FIRE suggests, you might want to be a barista, you might be a waiter, you could do really low paying jobs, minimal effort jobs with very little stress. And the investments just cover that gap for you going forward into the future. So it's very much aimed at those high stress jobs, but you still want some income, or potentially you want to get away from that job a little bit earlier than full FIRE. So you start side jobs. I know a lot of people that travel and work part-time simultaneously, and that's their retirement. So they've moved into that stage where they're doing part-time work while traveling. And if you're enjoying your job in some way, then you also fall into this category. Then you need to be asking yourself, how do I step back? How do I make this work less stressful for me, but still do what I want to do, still enjoy the work that I'm doing? And as I mentioned, you need a significant portion of your monthly expenses or annual expenses actually covered from the portfolio. And then obviously the rest you're covering with either a reduced hours job or a less stressful job. So the pros of this, obviously you get to FIRE sooner than you would have if you were going for a full FIRE, and it allows for like a gradual transition into retirement. So it's not like a hard stop. I'm working really hard and then I just retire. So it allows you to almost do it sort of a transition into that. Obviously it does require continuing to work in some way. And then I would say the tips here, if you want to move to Barista FIRE, you need to build a portfolio that's covering your base expenses. So that's a goal that you can aim at. What are your essential expenses? Rent, your car, any costs with travel, just figuring out what is the minimal lifestyle that you need to continue, and then what is the portfolio that matches that lifestyle, and then getting 50-60% of that. start identifying part-time work opportunities, start looking at how you can reduce the stress in your job if you want to continue in your current career. And then the other thing that you can also look at doing is just pursuing passion projects, pursuing things that you're actually genuinely interested in and you have a passion for, you really want to progress that, you really want to pursue that, then you can absolutely do that at this point. Lean fire, usually Lean fire is, it's going to cover all of my expenses. So we've gone from Barista FIRE, which is covering 50% or 60% of my expenses, to a Lean fire which covers all of my expenses, but I've reduced my lifestyle. I've gone down to minimal expenses, and I'm aiming for figuring out basically how to get to financial independence even on a smaller budget. And the target audience is, I would say, is people that are very comfortable with a minimal lifestyle, or they have low expenses, or a key thing here is just low cost of living areas. And even if you are in a high cost of living area, it's absolutely a very powerful tool to look at moving to a low cost of living area. So that's definitely something that you can also do. A lot of the time, Lean fire is, if you want to look at specific numbers, it's somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000 per year, just depending on your individual needs and preferences. It's easier to achieve, it's faster to achieve. You're getting there before full fire. And the reason why this is so powerful is because that 4% rule requires you to save 300 times your expenses. So for every dollar that you'd reduce your expenses by, you reduce the requirement of your portfolio by 300 times that value. So a good example here is a mortgage. If you have a mortgage and it's $1,000 a month or £1,000 a month, even if you only owe $10,000 on that mortgage, you need $300,000 in your portfolio to generate the necessary growth, the necessary income, passive income, that you can pay for your mortgage. So that £1,000 or $1,000 a month mortgage is costing you $300,000 in the value of the portfolio and the growth in the portfolio if you're withdrawing at 4%. So it's extremely powerful to reduce your expenses because of that multiplicative effect on the size and value of the portfolio. And obviously Lean fire, lower savings requirement right off the bat. It's easier, it's faster to achieve. But there are some cons, and I would say those cons, just limited flexibility. So once you've gone down to this Lean fire, if any unexpected expenses occur, if your lifestyle increases, if the lifestyle costs increase, your lifestyle, just the one that you're on, goes up for some reason, you need a bigger car, you need a different house, whatever the case may be. There could be medical costs as well that come in that increase your monthly or annual expenses. And then potentially you're in a position where you've already retired. It's very difficult to make that money back if you're aiming for Lean fire. For me, it's to get to Lean fire, you need to focus on budgeting. You need to be analyzing your budgets, being passionate about your budgets and really focusing on that, cutting discretionary expenses, and then looking at living in low cost areas. I would say those are the three things to get to Lean fire as quickly as possible. Fat fire, I would say, is the final step in the continuum. And what you're looking at here is you actually want a lifestyle when you retire that's going to be more expensive than your current expenses. So You're going for something where I want to travel a lot, where I want to be super comfortable. I want to upgrade my property or upgrade my house. I want to live in a bigger house, better house. I want nicer cars. Now I actually want to live a little. I want to do cruises, whatever the case may be, that you decide with your lifestyle, it's actually going to cost me a little bit more. I want to be super comfortable. Even if you're concerned with risk, even if you want to match your current expenses, you might want a little bit more of a buffer just because you're not that comfortable with the associated risks of going with 4%. You want to retire and you want to only withdraw 3%. And this is targeted at people that just enjoy a high standard of living, or people that live in high cost living areas, so your HCOL areas. And it's people that really want to continue to live a expensive lifestyle or a more expensive lifestyle. They don't necessarily want to cut their budgets on the expense side. And yeah, in general, if you want to look specifically at the numbers, oftentimes the portfolio size is getting to 2 million or even more, depending on your lifestyle. So FIRE, if you reach this goal, you get enormous flexibility and a lot of comfort in your retirement, obviously, but it does come with, you either need a higher income or it's going to take you longer to get that number, right? And just some tips here. You need to be a high income earner, or you need to be aiming at a high income earner, or you need to get really smart with cutting your expenses if you want to get there fast. You need a high savings rate. So for FIRE, you're looking at things like 50, 60, 70% of your income potentially being saved. You're focused on, in terms of what investments you're actually investing in, you're looking at long-term growth. And then you're also potentially incorporating a little bit of real estate into your investment portfolio, just to deal with rental income, bringing in a little bit of a consistent income. It's not fully passive, obviously, but it is generating income into your retirement if you can clear that mortgage. So when can I retire? There's a fantastic calculator, networthify.com. And you can actually just put in all of your figures if you know your numbers, if you know what your income is, you know your savings rate, you know your expenses rate. So it's automatically giving you all of your figures based on that. It's putting in what your withdrawal rate is going to be depending on your risk profile, depending on, and then obviously your return on investment between now and when you hit retirement and even post-retirement. What is that pot going to do, right? So I've put those figures in, and you can see what that looks like, right? So we can actually compare a savings rate for different time, for all of the figures being the exact same except the savings rate. So if you save 10% of your income, you are retiring in 36.8 years. It's that simple. If your income was double, if your savings rate was the same, so if your income was the same, if your income doubled and your expenses doubled and your savings rate stayed the same, it's still going to take 36.8 years. This calculation doesn't require to know, you don't need to earn a high income, right? You just need to maintain that savings rate. So if you did 10%, 36.8 years. If you did 30%, right? So if you start to get up into that 30% range, instead of taking 3 decades, you've now got that down to 20 years, 21.9 years with a savings rate of 30%. Same income, but now you've got your expenses a bit lower, your monthly savings a bit higher, and you've just brought that forward dramatically. If you save 50% of your income, you're going from 21 years to 14 years. And what I want to emphasize here is if you dramatically increase your savings rate the more you increase it by, the less you gain in time. So between 50 and 70%, you're gaining less than between 30 and 50%. So here's your 70, you've got it down to 7.9 years with a 70% savings rate. And it's one of the questions that a lot of people struggle with that are following FIRE. It's when to spend money. And for me, it's a very personal question, so it depends on your preferences and your goals, but it's something that you need to actually know the numbers to as well. So the question now becomes, I could cancel all of my holidays for the next 10 years and go from a savings rate of 60% to a savings rate of 70%. But if I were to do that, I potentially gain a year and a half or 2 years in my retirement goal. And that's something that you can actually sit back and go, is that worth it? To not do any holidays for the next 10 years or the next 8 years, to be able to retire 2 years earlier than you would have anyway. So knowing those numbers is a very powerful tool to enable you to know exactly at what point you're going to retire and what the cost is, if between saving more or spending that money. And you don't have to go all the way through this process. You can stop at any point along this path, right, along this continuum. So look at your financial goals, look at your risk tolerance, your lifestyle preferences. I would even say look at your job situation. Take all of that into consideration and then figure out where you want to stop on this path, what sort of lifestyle. And this isn't something that you make a decision on once. This is something that you can continuously reassess. And as you progress through this process, you get to decide what those goals are and where you want to be along that path. Obviously, as I mentioned, the things to consider, your lifestyle preferences. Are you minimalist? Do you want to live in a van or in a caravan and maybe travel a bit? Or are you looking at staying in your current house or even upgrading your house? What is your risk tolerance? Are you comfortable with a lower budget, or do you just want more security? What is your timelines? So do you want to retire in 10 years, or are you okay retiring in 20? And that can also depend on your age and a whole bunch of other factors. And then just career flexibility. If you're in a job where you might be limited in terms of being able to scale back down to something more partial, or are you stuck in a job where it absolutely requires this level of effort, you can't go down a day or two in the week, then obviously it just becomes really, really tough to figure out, can I get that career flexibility? And mark all of these goals. Don't just sit back and go, okay, well, I'm going for full FIRE, or I'm going for fat FIRE, where and then there's going to be nothing between now and then. There's nothing to celebrate. This is just going to be a 20-year slog where it's me trying to pursue this goal. And this is why I emphasize that it is a continuum. It's all on the same path where you can set those goals and those achievements. I've just hit Coast FI, or I've just hit Coast FIRE, I've just hit Barista FIRE. I could at this point go and work part-time or take a very easy job and retire now if I wanted to. So it just gives you that comfort as you go along. Set those milestones, figure out what those milestones are, even if you're aiming for the end goal. Tips to get started. One of the biggest things I notice with people on this journey, on the FIRE journey, is learn to, they know how to say no. They learn how to say no to things. So they batting away a lot of the things in life that are sort of coming at you in terms of, I need to upgrade my car, I need to keep up with the Joneses, whatever the case may be. just that lifestyle creep, tackling your budget and cutting on your expenses is super critical. So saying no to things is extremely powerful. I would argue it is the most powerful tool that you have, and also the easiest one to learn when it comes to working towards FIRE. So whether it's saying no to your kids, saying no to your partner, and saying no to the things around you, what your friends are doing, all of these things come into effect, but saying no is super powerful. Start thinking about your retirement. Start thinking about what you want to do if you were free to retire today or tomorrow or in 10 years time. Plan for that, think about that, make that feel real to you. And my advice would be, don't just say I'm going to go live on an island and drink martinis every day, because you're going to be, if you're 30 years old and you start that, you're going to get very bored very fast. Genuinely think about what you want to do when you retire if you're going on this journey, because it's extremely powerful and extremely motivating to have a very clear picture of what that is going to look like. Attack your expenses that you aren't passionate about. Figure out in your budget what's important and what's not important. If you don't have a clear picture on this, you're going to end up spending money and wasting money on things that aren't important. And get creative here. Tackle anything and everything in your budget to really reduce your expenses. And just an example, I mean, this is a little bit different. This is a person that was studying. He was living out of a van. He rented a parking lot because he was in New York. He couldn't get accommodation. He wanted to keep his costs as low as possible as a student. He was showering in the gym and living out of a van that was parked on a parking lot that he rented. And I'm not using it as an example to say go and do that. I'm saying think about how to be creative and really be super smart and really thoughtful about what you're spending money on and how to reduce those expenses, and then sifting through your costs and going, what is actually really important to me? Where can I cut? Attack your fixed costs. Housing. Can you live in a smaller space? Can you live in a different space? Do I need to be this close to city center? So just working out everything from rent, your cars. If you are driving 3 times a week and you're going for half an hour to get to work, half an hour back, whatever the case may be, then you're spending a couple of hours in your car. You don't need $1,000 or £1,000 a month in your car payment. You can cut that, figure out ways to cut, and be aggressive and be honest with yourself about what that really is and how important are these things really. If you're genuinely passionate about retiring and chasing some things that you're absolutely passionate about, that you want to do in retirement, then figuring out cutting becomes really easy. Figuring out how to cut becomes really easy. Grow that income. Figure out ways to work on the side hustles. Do anything and everything that you can to increase your income. Every dollar that you increase your income by, or every pound, has an enormous impact if you can save that money and invest it. Invest like your life depends on it, and stay away from some of those riskier investments, right? So you want to invest in index funds, you want to invest in ideally low-cost index funds. Potentially real estate's also going to be part of your portfolio, and you're chasing FIRE with real intention here. The other thing I would suggest, which is really critical, is just bridging finance. So a lot of your normal traditional retirement pots, there's going to be tax penalties if you're accessing those finances or those investments earlier. So what you want is you want an after-tax investment. You want some sort of investment that you can access without penalties between the age that you retire and when you hit 65 or whatever, 55, whatever the age is, that you can start accessing those traditional retirement accounts. I would also say, in terms of what to actually avoid on this journey, I'm not going to say don't do debt. I'm going to say be very careful with the debt that you take on, particularly credit debt or like consumer debt, like credit cards, car payments, even your house payment, anything that's debt oriented that ends up being some form of debt. Just be very cautious when you do that, because those things can get out of control quite quickly, and it's a drain on your income. And that income is going to be, you want that income available to be used towards saving towards your retirement. The other things like single stocks, things like crypto, all of these high risk investments, I would be very cautious about that. You need to be thinking long term. You need to be thinking about, how do I get to FIRE as quickly as possible? And that involves safe investments. What you don't want is a situation where you have risky investments and they go down or they go to zero when you're on this journey. It's a huge knockback. The other thing that I would like to add here is just in terms of your job, don't let a job be a reason to chase FIRE. It's not enough, in my opinion, it's not enough because you don't have anything passionate driving you forward. So I would be focused on that instead. I would be like, what do I want to do? Yes, the job can be a motivator, but my advice in that situation would be getting out of that job, figuring out how to move out of the job that you're in, as opposed to going, okay, great, I'm going to chase FIRE and in 20 years I'm going to retire. It's not a good recipe if you're going to be stuck in a bad job and that's your motivation to retire early. The three main problems I have with FIRE, and these are just general criticisms. Low income earners really struggle with FIRE, and the reason for that is because if your income is low, you have limited funds available to invest a large portion of it. So much of your money gets tied up into your fixed costs that you just don't have that freedom. And that makes it really difficult to start a FIRE journey and start progressing on a FIRE journey. So there is almost a limitation here in terms of who qualifies, simply because even if you cut expenses super aggressively, it might not still be enough to start a FIRE journey where you're getting that savings rate up to 20-30%. Sometimes, obviously, with FIRE, if you start your retirement early and you don't set aside enough, so you think a 5% withdrawal rate is okay, it's a risk that I'm willing to take, you might find yourself 30 years later, let's say you retired when you're 40, you might find that by the time you get to 70, your funds in your portfolio are too low. And at that point, you might have to go back and work, or you might have to drastically reduce your lifestyle because you haven't managed that money and you didn't save enough when you decided to take on FIRE. And then I would say personally, the biggest challenge I have with FIRE is switching to being a spender. So you get into all these habits to save so much, and such a big portion of your portfolio, to get to the FIRE number in the first place, such a big portion of your income is saved that you end up with a mindset of a saver. And you have to unlearn that behavior. You have to figure out how to become a spender again, and that becomes really challenging and really difficult. So in summary, FIRE is a continuum. It's not this part or that part or this goal or this goal. For me, it's all on the same line. It's all on the same path. It's just, when do you want to do it? What's your plan? What's your aim? and find which one you're most comfortable with. If you want to be a bit younger and you want to spend your money and have a bit more money free every month, you don't want to save for retirement, you want to use that money now, then Barista FIRE is where you need to be, right? So Barista FIRE will get you there. But if you want to stop working completely and you want to be super comfortable, then you're chasing Fat FIRE. But it's all on the same path. And everybody gets there. Everybody has to get there. Feel free to share your FIRE goals in the comments. And that's just a general question for everybody watching. Which step are you on for this journey? If you were to do the maths for your numbers, where are you on this process? Please feel free to support my channel. It absolutely helps by liking, subscribing, or sharing this with friends or colleagues that might find this content useful. And if you have any questions or requests on something that you want me to cover, please feel free to email me at financialbasicsabc@gmail.com. See you next time. Bye.